Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, December 12th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today: Israel rejects pressure for a ceasefire. So Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant on Monday rejected international pressure for a ceasefire in Gaza and signaled that the brutal assault will continue for months or even longer. So in just over 2 months of Israel's campaign in Gaza, that's as long as it's been, 2 months and a few days, at least 18,000 Palestinians have been killed, including over 7,000 children. The number of wounded is very high. Over 49,000 people have been injured. And the casualty numbers are from Gaza's health ministry. They're considered to be a low estimate because they're not accounting for the people trapped under the rubble, the bodies, and the people that are still alive. On top of the massive death toll from Israel's airstrikes and ground operations, health services in Gaza have collapsed, and that's due to these Israeli attacks on hospitals. They're laying siege to hospitals, and just the Israeli siege on Gaza in general, a lack of fuel accounts for a lot of the hospitals having to close, having to shut down. Palestinians are also facing severe food shortages, so if this thing does continue for months and months, we will start seeing people dying from hunger and disease. Doctors Without Borders said on Monday that its employees in southern Gaza have seen, quote, the complete collapse of healthcare services in the area, along with the rest of the healthcare system in Gaza, end quote. So these horrific scenes that are coming out of Gaza have prompted more calls for peace and negotiations, but the U.S. has not been fazed as it continues to provide unconditional military support, and they vetoed that resolution at the UN Security Council. So back to Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, he told the Associated Press on Monday that it would take time, speaking about Israel's operations in Gaza, and he suggested that the current phase of the war, which involved constant airstrikes and heavy ground fighting, will last for weeks, and that further military action against what he called pockets of resistance would continue for months. And then Hanegbi, who's the Israeli National Security Advisor, he made similar comments, saying that the time it will take to achieve Israel's goals in Gaza, quote, cannot be measured in weeks, and I'm not sure it can be measured in months, end quote. So suggesting this thing could, last for a year or longer. And there was a Financial Times report recently that said that Israeli officials expect this thing to last for over a year. So Israeli officials are claiming now, Gallant said this, Hanegbi said this, that they've killed 7,000 Hamas fighters since October 7th. It's not clear if that total includes the Hamas fighters that they killed that attacked southern Israel, or if this is just the ones they're saying they killed inside Gaza. This number is just a claim from the Israelis, so it's not confirmed. And just for a little perspective on the Hamas death toll and the civilian death toll of what Israel's willing to do to just kill one Hamas commander, I just referenced back to that 972 magazine report that confirmed basically that Israel was purposely targeting civilians. And it also said that at least in one case, the Israeli military approved a strike that killed hundreds of Palestinian civilians in an attempt to just kill one Hamas commander. So hundreds of civilians for one Hamas guy. So that's kind of their attitude. So 7,000 Hamas fighters seems like a pretty, that's the highest estimate that I've seen from Israeli officials so far. All right, so the next one here, Borrell says that destruction in Gaza may be worse than Germany in World War II. So this is Joseph Borrell. He's the European Union's top foreign policy official. He's their top diplomat. And he said on Monday that the destruction in Gaza as a result of the Israeli bombing campaign could be even greater than the damage to German cities during World War II. And that is really saying something. Borrell called the situation in Gaza catastrophic, apocalyptic, and noted that the Israeli onslaught has resulted in an incredible number of civilian casualties. Discussing the destruction of buildings in Gaza, He said, quote, "It is more or less or even greater than the destruction suffered by the German cities during the Second World War," end quote. Borrell made similar comments on Friday, saying the Israeli bombing campaign in Gaza was one of the most intense in history and that the destruction is, quote, "comparable, if not higher, to levels of destruction of German cities during World War II," end quote. So there was recently a report from Financial Times that found the damage to northern Gaza was comparable to the most heavily bombed cities of Germany in World War II. And they quoted a guy named Robert Pape. He's an American military historian who focuses on air wars and air power. And he said, quote, "Dresden, Hamburg, Cologne, some of the world's heaviest ever bombings are remembered by their place names. Gaza will also go down as a place name denoting one of history's heaviest conventional bombing campaigns," end quote. Israeli officials and their supporters in the U.S. have invoked the Allied strategic bombing campaigns of World War II to justify the mass slaughter in Gaza. I put in a quote from Israel's ambassador to the UK. This was from back in October, and this was reported by the Gray Zone, but this was in an interview with Sky News. And she said, quote, "There were many, many civilians that got attacked from your attacks on German cities. Dresden was a symbol, but you attacked Hamburg, you attacked other cities, and altogether it was over 600,000 civilian Germans that got killed. Was it worth it in order to defeat Nazi Germany?" And the answer was yes, end quote. So comparing Hamas to the Nazis, we have seen that quite a bit from Israeli officials. And this is just one quote from one Israeli official. This is something that's been repeated by a lot of them, comparing it to the bombings during World War II, including Netanyahu has invoked this. And the Israeli bombing campaign, besides the bombings of Germany in World War II, it's also been compared to the U.S. bombings of Japanese cities, which includes the fire bombings of Tokyo, which in one night killed around 100,000 civilians, and the dropping of the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's what they're talking about. That's what they're referencing. And this was something that Senator Lindsey Graham has said as well. He said, quote, "Gaza is going to look like Tokyo and Berlin at the end of World War II when this is over. And if it doesn't look that way, Israel made a mistake," end quote. And he made those comments in an interview where he said there was no limit to the number of civilians Israel kills in Gaza, which is the policy of the Biden administration as it continues to provide unconditional military aid despite the massive civilian death toll. So again, it's just something to see Borrell, an EU official, make this comparison. It goes to show the U.S., even among its Western allies, is incredibly hawkish on this. They're the ones blocking the ceasefire at the UN. They're the ones giving Israel political cover and giving them all these bombs that they're dropping on Gaza, when even their allies are saying, this is apocalyptic, as Borrell put it. All right, so the next one here, Israeli army arbitrarily detains Palestinian women from Gaza. So this article is from Middle East Eye. The Israeli army has arbitrarily detained dozens of women and girls from Gaza without disclosing their whereabouts or the charges they face, Palestinian groups and families have said. So since Israel launched a ground invasion of Gaza in late October, its forces have detained hundreds of civilians from their homes or while fleeing on a road declared by the army as part of a safe corridor. So we've seen images lately of Palestinian men being rounded up and stripped naked. And, the IDF admitted that they're not all Hamas. They were trying to figure out if they were Hamas fighters. So that's how they're treating civilian men. But this is saying that they've also been detaining civilian women and girls, and their families don't know where they are. So some have been released after interrogation, but many have been taken to undisclosed locations, including mothers who were separated from their babies and detained. The Palestinian Authority's Commission of Detainees and Ex-Detainees Affairs on Sunday confirmed that at least 142 females, including senior women and infants, are currently held in Israeli jails. In a joint statement with the Palestinian Prisoners Club, the commission warned that horrific crimes have been carried out against the female prisoners. It added that they were detained while forcibly fleeing along with tens of thousands of Palestinians from the northern Gaza Strip to the south through this road again that they said was safe. Some of these women were stopped at a checkpoint set up by the military and taken prison, saying that they're being taken to several prisons inside Israel. So this is something we haven't really heard much about. And they quote some Palestinians who had this experience with their family members just being detained by Israel, and they haven't seen them or heard from them since. And of course, it makes it extra difficult with the communications being broken down. All right, the next one here. Father of Al Jazeera journalist killed in an Israeli airstrike. This article is from Al Jazeera, and this is, I believe, the fourth example of an Al Jazeera reporter losing a family member. In some cases, they lost a lot of family members in Israeli airstrikes. So the father of Al Jazeera journalist Anas al-Sharif has been killed in an Israeli airstrike in northern Gaza. Al-Sharif told Al Jazeera that his 65-year-old father, Jamal, was killed on Monday after his home in Jabalia refugee camp was struck. So it says Al Jazeera condemned the bombing. And yes, Al-Sharif is the fourth Al Jazeera journalist to lose family members since Israel launched its assault on Gaza on October 7th. And I just wanted to scroll down because they have this chart of the number of journalists that have been killed. So this is journalist family members, and this chart doesn't account for that, for journalists losing their family. But it says since October 7th, 56 Palestinian journalists have been killed. And that's just a huge number. 3 Lebanese journalists have been killed and 4 Israelis. So many journalists being killed in this conflict, incomparable to other recent wars. All right, so I want to take this moment to mention that it is our fundraiser at antiwar.com, and we actually have matching funds now. So that means every dollar that you give will be doubled, so you can double your impact by donating to antiwar.com. Go to antiwar.com/donate. You can see the different ways you can support us. Credit card, PayPal, crypto. You could set up a monthly donation. This is how I'm able to make this show, is because of antiwar.com and because we're funded by our readers. That's how we're able to maintain this independent editorial line that we have and stay anti-war and non-interventionist no matter what the conflict is, no matter what party is in charge in D.C. We're always opposing the wars, and we're going to oppose the next war and the next one after that. Hopefully, there's not too many in the future, and it's the end of the year, so you could write whatever you donate to us off your taxes. We're a nonprofit, so that means less of your money goes to the war machine. So again, antiwar.com/donate. Please help us out. All right, so the next one here. Israel used U.S.-provided white phosphorus in Lebanon. So Israel used U.S.-supplied white phosphorus munitions in an attack on southern Lebanon that wounded 9 civilians. And this was reported by the Washington Post on Monday. So white phosphorus can be used by militaries as a smokescreen or as an incendiary chemical weapon that can burn buildings or human skin on contact. It's a very nasty weapon. It can burn skin all the way down to the bone. It can damage organs. It can be really, really bad. And a journalist working for the Washington Post found the remnants of 3 155mm white phosphorus artillery shells in Deraa, Lebanon, near the border with Israel. The white phosphorus incinerated at least 4 homes, and 3 out of the 9 civilians who were injured in the attack had to be hospitalized. The production code on the shells showed that they were produced in the U.S. It's unclear if this white phosphorus ammunition was provided to Israel as part of the billions in annual military aid that it receives each year from the U.S., or if it is part of the new weapon shipments that the U.S. has been sending since October 7th. There were reports of Israel using phosphorus just a few days into the war in Gaza, so I would guess that this was already in their stockpile. So the Israeli military claims that it only uses white phosphorus to create a smoke screen to protect the location of its troops, but there were no Israeli soldiers on the Lebanese side of the border when the incendiary weapon was fired on in this civilian area. Photos and videos verified by the Post showed white phosphorus falling on Deraa on October 16th. Rights groups are calling for the attack to be investigated as a war crime. Human Rights Watch has said it also verified videos of white phosphorus being used in Gaza in October. So on October 15th, which was one day before this attack in southern Lebanon, Jake Sullivan, the U.S. National Security Advisor, was asked about Israel's use of white phosphorus, the reports of them using it in Lebanon as well as Gaza. And he said that it was not his job to draw red lines for the Israeli military. So that's the U.S. attitude about this. All right, so the next one here, Israeli shelling kills mayor of Lebanese village. So this article is from Reuters, and it says an Israeli shell killed the mayor of a Lebanese village on Monday, a relative in Lebanon's national news agency said, as Israel and Lebanon's Hezbollah kept up hostilities ignited by the war in Gaza. So Hussein Mansour was killed in his home in the village of Taibeh, a few miles from the border with Israel. The relative Mohammed Mansour told Reuters. The shell which struck him did not explode, the national news agency said. The Israeli army did not immediately respond to a request for comment. So violence escalated at Lebanon's border with Israel on Sunday. Hezbollah launched explosive drones and powerful missiles at Israeli positions, and Israeli airstrikes rocked several towns and villages in South Lebanon. So tensions remain pretty high on that Israel-Lebanon border, and civilians continue to be killed. All right, so the next one here, Zelensky arrives in the U.S. and pleads for more aid. So Zelensky arrived in the U.S. on Monday and pleaded for more military aid in a speech at the National Defense University in Washington, where he was introduced by Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. So Zelensky said, quote, "Ukrainians haven't given up and won't give up. We know what to do, and you can count on Ukraine, and we hope just as much to be able to count on you," end quote. So Zelensky's visit comes as the White House is pressuring Congress to pass that massive $111 billion spending bill that includes over $60 billion for Ukraine, and the idea is to fund the war for another year. The White House has said that if Congress does not authorize the funds, the U.S. will run out of money for the war. Zelensky said, quote, "Every one of you here understands for a soldier to wait for munitions, waiting for weeks, months without knowing if support will come at all. Every one of you with command experience knows what it means when, instead of moving forward, you're just watching, waiting for armor or equipment while your enemy is satisfied and preparing for assaults," end quote. So despite Ukraine's failed counteroffensive, Zelensky is determined to continue the war, even as his top general has said Ukrainian forces cannot break through Russian defenses, and Ukraine is facing a manpower shortage. Aides close to Zelensky have said in comments to Time magazine that he is deluding himself into thinking Ukraine can win the war. Doesn't matter to Biden, Blinken, Sullivan. They just want to keep this thing going. So Zelensky will meet with Biden on Tuesday and is set to hold talks with House Speaker Mike Johnson on the same day, and he's going to meet with senators to make his pitch. And as things stand now, Republicans are still looking for concessions from Democrats on the border issues. They want changes to the asylum laws. So we'll see how all of that plays out. All right, so the next one here, nearly half of U.S. voters say that Biden is spending too much on Ukraine. So as the Biden administration is looking for all this money, a poll has found that nearly half of American voters think the U.S. is spending too much on the conflict. So this poll was conducted by Financial Times and Michigan Ross, found that 48% of respondents believe the U.S. was spending too much on military and financial aid to Ukraine, while 27% said the U.S. was spending the right amount, and just 11% believe Washington should be spending more. So just 11% think they should be spending more. That means only 11% of the people responding to this poll think that Congress should authorize this over $60 billion. And Republicans are more opposed to the U.S. spending on the war. 65% said the U.S. was doing too much, compared with 52% of independents and 32% of Democrats. So these results do not bode well for Zelensky. Unfortunately, I do think the hawks in Congress are still determined to get this funding. So I won't be surprised if they do get it. And this poll also actually posed the same question about U.S. spending on military aid for Israel since October 7th and found similar results, slightly more support for sending more to Israel, but the poll found 40% of respondents believed the U.S. was spending too much, while 30% said the U.S. was spending the right amount. Several polls now have shown that the majority of American voters favor a ceasefire in Gaza, which has been rejected by the Biden administration. All right, so the next one here, Russian oil revenue is higher now than before the war. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute, and it says a Bloomberg analysis of Russian energy exports found Moscow has largely successfully circumvented the Group of Seven price cap on Russian oil exports. Russia has found buyers in India and China to replace exports to Europe. Additionally, Moscow is contracted with a group of tankers willing to transport Russian oil despite potential economic penalties. Russia's net oil revenues of $11.3 billion in October accounted for 31% of the nation's overall net budget revenue for the month. And this was the highest since May 2022 and exceeded any single month in the year before the invasion of Ukraine, which initially caused huge volatility to the nation's exports. So they bounced back pretty quickly after the sanctions, but this is showing that it's more of a long-term thing despite this oil price cap. And you have U.S. officials saying that they're looking to halve Russian energy exports, but that strategy is clearly failing. Just another thing that's failing. The last one here, alleged Discord leaker's commanding officer has been removed. This is another one from Kyle. And this is about Jack Teixeira, the U.S. Air National Guardsman who allegedly leaked the Discord leaks. Some of that stuff revealed, one thing that those leaks revealed is that the U.S. did not think Ukraine could regain much territory in the counteroffensive, but they pushed for it anyway. So that was a pretty big leak. But I know this investigation, they determined that Teixeira acted alone, but they relieved his commanding officer because they're saying he should have raised the alarm after he was informed that Teixeira was seeking information that was outside the scope of his position. And airmen working night duty like Teixeira had ample opportunity to access classified sites and print a high volume of products without supervision or detection. That's what this report said. And in total, 15 Air National Guardsmen, including the commander, received some form of discipline over the Teixeira leaks. So saying that basically the people around him should have known something was up and should have done something to stop it. And he was posting these classified documents onto Discord, onto a server that he had with his friends that he made. He's a young guy. He made friends online during the pandemic. I believe, if I remember his story correctly, his last year of high school was locked down, which is something I can't imagine, being that young and having to deal with that. And then, he made friends online, and it seems like he was trying to impress them by posting these classified documents. Allegedly, that's what he's being accused of by the U.S. government. But that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints. We have one from Joe Loria, Not a Penny Nor a Bullet Off the Table. One from James Carden, The Best and the Brightest Redux. One from Ramsey Baroud, Moscow and Gaza. Is Russia ready for a major shift in its Middle East policy? One from Doug Bandow, Selling Aid to Ukraine, Spilling Blood to Create Jobs. And our spotlight is from Aaron Mate, Israel's genocide in Gaza has Biden's green light. So go check all that out. You can please help us with our fundraiser if you have the means, antiwar.com/donate. You could also share this show, like and subscribe on YouTube. You could comment. Follow me on Twitter. I'm at DeCampDave. Follow antiwar.com. I'll be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.